My daughter did not receive any gift at a time when all children received a gift for Christmas, but karma did its job. My name is Harris Coulter, and I've spent most of my adult life learning how to lose quietly. I lost my father when I was 14. I lost my sense of home soon after that. I lost a marriage that should have ended sooner and a brother I once admired. But the one thing I never lost and never will is my daughter, Thea. She's 10 years old. All wide eyes, curious questions, and laughter that spills out like spring water. And this year, for the first time since the divorce, she asked me the one thing I didn't want to answer. Can we go to Grandma's for Christmas? It was early December, a chilly morning, frost on the window, and she was eating toast at the counter while I packed her lunch. She asked it so innocently, so casually, like she was naming a place of warmth and safety, not the emotionally frozen tundra I had walked away from 5 years ago. Grandma. My mother. Adelaide Coulter. Thea barely remembered our last visit. She was only 5, too young to understand the undercurrent in the air, the way my brother Dane's smile always held a little sneer, or how my mother only asked questions that had answers she wanted to hear. But kids don't remember what we say. They remember how we make them feel. And Thea had left that visit with her arms crossed over her chest in the car, asking me why no one let her open a present. Back then, I told her they probably just forgot. That maybe next year would be different. But next year, we stayed home. And the year after that. And again, until this morning, when she looked at me across the breakfast table with quiet hope in her voice. Not pressure. Just hope. I opened my mouth to answer and said the only thing that didn't feel like a betrayal. We'll think about it. That same evening, an email arrived in my inbox from my mother. Not a call, not a text. Just an email titled, Holiday Dinner at the Coulter House, Attendance Requested. It was coldly worded, practical, like a business memo. December 25th, 5 p.m. dinner to follow gift exchange. Dress appropriately. I showed it to Thea. Her face lit up like a lantern. I want to go, she said immediately. Please, Dad. I stared at the screen a moment longer, then nodded. Not because I wanted to. Because I could see how much it meant to her. And sometimes, as a parent, that's the only reason you need. The week before Christmas passed in a blur. Thea drew cards for every cousin she barely knew. She painted snowflakes on recycled paper, used her allowance to buy a tiny candle for Grandma Adelaide, and asked me to help her wrap it in foil so it would sparkle like snow. She picked her outfit days early, a navy blue dress with white buttons, matching tights, and a velvet bow I'd forgotten she had. Every night, she asked questions. Do you think Uncle Dane will remember my name? Will Aunt Rhonda still have that cat that scratched me? Can I sit next to you at the table? I said yes to every one. What I didn't tell her is that I wasn't sure Dane had ever learned her name in the first place. That Rhonda's cat had long since died and been replaced by an even meaner one. That the table would be long, stretched, and perfectly set, and I'd be seated as far from my daughter as possible, because Adelaide liked symmetry. Christmas Day arrived with silver clouds and a fine dusting of snow. We loaded into my car, gift bags in the trunk, and drove north, the roads clear, the air cold enough to make every exhale feel sharp. As we pulled into the long, curved driveway of the Coulter estate, Thea gasped softly. It's like a castle. It wasn't. But it always looked like one to people who didn't grow up inside it. The windows glowed gold, the wreath on the front door was made of real pine and woven ribbon, and the landscaping lights sparkled like fairy dust on the hedges. Picture perfect. Timeless. And utterly hollow. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and aged wood. My sister-in-law, Rhonda, opened the door and offered a tight-lipped smile. Her makeup was perfect. Her eyes were cold. Look who decided to show up, she said as she ushered us in. I helped Thea out of her coat. She clutched her gift bag with both hands and stepped inside. The living room was already buzzing with laughter. Dane stood near the fireplace, drink in hand, dressed in a gray sweater and jeans that probably cost more than my rent. He smiled when he saw me, but it wasn't the kind that reached his heart. Harris, he said, walking over with his arms outstretched like we were friends. And the kid. What a surprise. He knelt slightly, looking at Thea like she was a display item. Lena, right? Thea, she said quietly. Right, he grinned. Thea. Of course. Adelaide swept into the room a moment later, wrapped in a wine-colored shawl, her hair perfectly styled, makeup done to appear effortless. She looked at me, then Thea, then back again. Glad you made it, she said, voice smooth as ice. Dinner will be at 6. Try not to make a mess. Thea offered her candle with 2 hands, her eyes bright. I brought you a gift. Adelaide blinked. Took the candle. Forced to smile. How thoughtful. Then she turned to talk to someone else. I felt something inside me harden, but I said nothing. The evening passed in a blur of glass clinks and polite conversation. Dane talked about his promotion. Rhonda bragged about her latest fundraising gala. No one asked what Thea liked to read. No one asked me how we were doing. We were background noise, scenery in someone else's curated holiday. At dinner, Thea sat at the kids' table. I sat 4 seats away, between my cousin Wesley and some neighbor I didn't recognize. The food was flawless. The company, less so. After dessert, the living room filled again. The tree stood tall in the corner, glittering with white lights and hand-selected ornaments that matched the decor. Beneath it, dozens of gifts, each one wrapped in gold or red, stacked neatly. The adults sat down with wine glasses. Rhonda and Adelaide began handing out presents. Names were called. Boxes were opened. Children squealed. Adults chuckled. And Thea sat, quietly, on the floor. Waiting. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her back straight. Her eyes scanned the pile. One by one, the cousins unwrapped tablets, headphones, dolls, and toy drones. No one called her name. No one handed her a box. No one even looked her way. I stood up, walked to the tree, and crouched to check behind the trunk. There was nothing. And when I turned back, Dane was looking at me with a smirk. He raised his voice just enough. She's lucky she's even here. Not everyone counts as family forever. A few chuckled. And Thea? She didn't cry. She didn't ask why. She simply stood up, walked over to the tree, and reached behind it. I watched, stunned, as she pulled out a small gift I hadn't known she brought. Wrapped in silver foil. With a hand-lettered tag. To Uncle Dane. And she walked toward him, gift in hand, her voice quiet but clear. I brought something for you too. The room went still. It wasn't the kind of dramatic hush that comes after a grand toast or speech. It was the sudden pause of people who realize they are witnessing something unplanned, something not meant for polite company. Adelaide stopped mid-sip of her wine. Rhonda froze, a ribbon of wrapping paper still in her hand. Even the kids quieted, their excitement suspended in midair. Dane blinked as Thea approached, holding out the gift wrapped in foil, the hand-lettered tag fluttering slightly as she moved. To Uncle Dane, she said again, softly, clearly. He stared at the package like it was an alien object. What's this? He said, smirking, but with a tremor of confusion beneath it. A present, Thea said, her voice steady. I made it for you. He looked at me, then at the others in the room, then slowly took it from her hands. The smirk didn't quite leave his face, but it wavered, just slightly. He peeled back the foil slowly, the soft crackling of the wrap louder than the music that still played faintly in the background. Inside was a single sheet of paper, thick, folded carefully, with a drawing. I recognized her style immediately. She'd spent hours drawing in her room the week before, but she wouldn't show me what it was. Now I understood why. It was a family dinner scene. The long table was filled with people, smiling, arms raised in mid-conversation, gifts at their feet. Grandma Adelaide was there, hair high and regal. Rhonda and Dane sat in the center, surrounded by cousins. Everyone was laughing, colored in vibrant reds, blues, and golds. And then, just off to the side, barely touching the edge of the table, was a smaller figure. Slightly apart from the rest. Drawn in gray. No smile. No gifts. Just present, but not welcomed. The figure was labeled Thea. On the back of the drawing, in her small, uneven handwriting, she had written, "It hurts to be left out. Maybe now you understand." I felt the room exhale all at once. Dane stared at the drawing. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. He didn't make a joke. He didn't hand it back. He just held it, staring. Adelaide was the first to speak. "What's that?" she said sharply, rising a little in her seat. "Let me see it." Dane didn't respond. Rhonda leaned forward, trying to peek over his shoulder. "It's just a drawing, isn't it?" Still, Dane said nothing. Thea stood there, hands at her sides, her face unreadable. Not angry. Not smug. Just present. Unapologetically present. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. She knew what she had done. And she wasn't going to take it back. Rhonda's tone sharpened. "It's a little dramatic, don't you think?" I stepped forward then, the slow burn in my chest catching fire. "No," I said. It's honest. She turned to me, eyebrow raised. Come on, Harris. No one meant to. You didn't have to mean it, I said, cutting her off. You just had to notice. One child sat through an entire evening watching every other kid open gift after gift, and not a single person thought to ask if she'd received anything. Not one. I turned, addressing the room. Not one of you thought about her. Not her name. Not her age. Not whether she might want to feel included. Thea still hadn't moved. Dane finally looked up at me. His face was blank, but the paper in his hands was shaking. I didn't know she'd feel that way, he said, voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I thought she's a kid. She'd forget. I shook my head. Kids don't forget. They just stop expecting better. Adelaide set down her wineglass. We invited you, didn't we? That should have counted for something. I laughed, bitter and low. You didn't invite us. You summoned us. There's a difference. No one responded. The room was stone quiet again. Thea turned and walked toward me. I knelt down, met her at eye level. Are you okay? I asked. She nodded. I just wanted him to see. I reached out and brushed a hair from her forehead. He saw. I stood and turned to Adelaide. You spent your life teaching me how to behave, I said. How to keep things pretty and perfect and silent. But you forgot to teach anyone how to be kind. She looked away, lips pressed tight. I'm not doing it your way anymore, I continued. Not for appearances. Not for guilt. And never again at my daughter's expense. I turned to Thea. Let's go. We began walking toward the front hallway, coats still on the rack. A few cousins murmured. One of the younger ones, Clara, I think, stood up and reached into the pile of open gifts, then hurried after us. She caught up just before we reached the door. This is for her, Clara said, handing Thea a small silver box. She didn't get one. That's not right. Thea smiled, gently. Thank you. I looked down at Clara, nodded once, then opened the door. The cold hit immediately, crisp and cutting. But it felt cleaner than the air inside. We stepped out together. The snow had picked up again, flakes dancing in the porchlight, swirling like whispers. The car ride was silent at first. Halfway home, Thea said, I think Uncle Dane really didn't know. Maybe, I said. But now he does. Yeah. I glanced over. She was turning the small silver box over in her lap. It's not about getting a present, she said. It's about not being forgotten. And that, more than anything, was the truth of it. We got home around 8 that night. The city lights blinked gently through the thin layer of snow now resting on the streets. Thea was quiet as we walked through the front door, setting down our coats and shaking the cold from our sleeves. Our little living room looked smaller than usual, but somehow more honest. The tree we'd decorated together was still lit, crooked with handmade ornaments and popcorn garlands. A few wrapped boxes sat beneath it, just enough to say we tried but not enough to compete with the avalanche she'd seen that night. Thea walked over to the tree, sat down, and unwrapped the silver box Clara had given her. Inside was a small bracelet with a charm in the shape of a star. She turned it over in her hand for a moment, then without saying a word, got up and hung it on the tree. I made her a cup of warm milk, the way I always did when her thoughts ran too deep for bedtime. She curled up on the couch under the blanket her mother once knitted before she left the country for a job that became more important than parenting. Thea never asked about her anymore. She'd stopped expecting answers. Do you think they'll forget again next year? She asked me quietly. I sat beside her and took a breath. They might. But you won't. She didn't respond right away. Then, softly, I don't want to hate them. You don't, I said. That's why it hurt. I watched her nod slowly, eyes glassy but dry. We didn't say much more that night. She fell asleep on the couch, and I carried her to bed, kissed her forehead, and stood in her doorway longer than I should have, just listening to the even sound of her breathing. I sat at the kitchen table afterward, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was Dane. I didn't answer right away. I waited. When he texted a second time, "Can I call you?" I let it ring once before picking up. He didn't say hello. I don't know what to say, he admitted, voice hoarse, maybe from the scotch, maybe from something else. She made me see myself in a way I didn't want to. She didn't want to hurt you, I said. I know. There was a long pause. I opened the drawing again after you left, he said. I showed Rhonda. She didn't get it at first, but I did. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a mirror. And I didn't like what I saw. I could tell he meant it. Or at least, that he was trying. I didn't mean what I said, he continued. That she wasn't family. It was a bad joke. A messed up way to cope with the fact that you left and I didn't. I didn't leave, I said. I was pushed out. You just watched. Another silence. I want to make it right, he said. Not with me, I replied. With her. She's 10. She's also watching everything you do. So pick carefully. I want to come over. Tomorrow. No wife, no gifts. Just me. I looked toward the hallway. You can come. But if she doesn't want to talk to you, you respect that. I will. The next morning, Thea asked for extra butter on her pancakes and didn't mention the night before. She was drawing again. Another family dinner scene, this time in pastels. I didn't look closely. Not yet. Dane arrived just after lunch, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, no designer labels, no cologne. He stood at the door like he'd forgotten how knocking worked. I let him in. Thea was in the living room, sketchpad still open. She looked up when he entered but didn't speak. He knelt beside her on the carpet. I stayed in the kitchen, watching. I'm sorry, he said. What I said. What I didn't say. You gave me something I didn't deserve, your honesty. And I ignored it. That won't happen again. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. It's not a present, he said quickly. It's just a note. She opened it. Inside was a single sentence, written in all capital letters, unevenly. You matter. Even when we forget to show it. She looked at the words for a long time. Then, finally, she nodded. Do you want to see the new one I drew? She asked. He nodded. More than anything. She showed him. In this drawing, the family was together again, but the table was round. Everyone faced each other. No one was off to the side. And Dane's figure was smiling, with his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. When he saw it, his eyes welled up, but he didn't let them fall. He looked at her and said, "Thank you for putting me back in the picture." That was the first time in years I saw my brother mean something he said. He left not long after. We didn't need him to stay. Later that night, Thea hung the envelope next to the star bracelet on the tree. She didn't say anything about it. Just smiled. And I realized it wasn't about being remembered in the moment. It was about building something no one could forget again. The next few days moved with an unusual stillness. There were no grand messages from Adelaide. No unsolicited opinions from Rhonda. No gift baskets arriving with belated tags or apologies dressed up in obligation. And yet, something had shifted. Thea continued to draw. Every day after school, she'd sit at the kitchen table with her new set of colored pencils, sketching scenes of people, some real, some imagined. But I noticed something small, something powerful. No one was drawn alone anymore. It was as if she'd built a new version of family through her pencil strokes, one that didn't need permission to exist. We didn't talk about that night much, but its presence lingered. In the quiet gestures. The way Thea gave her drawings more space between the figures. The way I stopped flinching when the phone buzzed. And eventually, the buzz did return. A week after Christmas, Adelaide called. Not a text. Not a forwarded meme with a Hallmark quote about forgiveness. A call. I answered on the third ring, more out of curiosity than interest. Harris, she said. I don't want to talk about what happened. I just want to ask, how's Thea? It took me a moment to process that it wasn't a trap. She's okay, I said. Drawing a lot. I saw the picture, she admitted. Dane sent it. The round table won. Silence stretched. I was at the edge too, she added. Not as far as Dane. But not in the center. It surprised me, that small note of self-awareness in her voice. Like she'd finally glanced at the house she'd built and saw how many doors were locked from the inside. You were always more concerned with presentation than connection, I said. That's why your table's always been long and stiff. It kept everyone at a distance. She didn't argue. Instead, she said, she's a good girl. Strong. She didn't get it from me, I replied. No, she said. But maybe she reminded you how to be. That line stayed with me long after I hung up. There wasn't an apology. I didn't expect one. And yet, for the first time, she didn't try to deflect or deny. She simply acknowledged what she saw. And that was a start. New Year's Eve came quietly. Thea wanted to stay up until midnight, but she only made it to 10:30. She fell asleep curled up beside me on the couch, the living room glowing in warm lamplight and fading tree lights. Before she drifted off, she asked, "Do you think Uncle Dane will come again?" I thought for a second. "I think if you invite him, he will." She nodded. "Maybe not yet. But one day." Then she was asleep. After I carried her to bed, I found myself staring at the kitchen wall. On it hung the drawing, the original one. The gray figure at the edge. The heavy truth of it still visible despite its childish lines. Beside it now was a second frame. The round table. Thea had asked me to hang it so the old one didn't feel so lonely. I stood there for a while, thinking about all the words I hadn't said. About the versions of myself I'd shed over the years just to survive in that house. About how long I'd stayed quiet to keep the air calm only to choke on that same air later. Thea's drawing wasn't just a reflection of what she saw. It was a roadmap. She didn't just call out the pain. She offered a way forward. One that required us to sit together. To turn toward each other, not away. A few weeks later, Dane texted. "Just checking in. Any good drawing prompts for a reformed uncle?" I smirked, replied, "Tried what trust looks like in crayon." He wrote back a thumbs up and said he'd drop by next weekend, bring his own sketchpad. I told Thea that night, and she smiled. Not because she was excited, but because she wasn't surprised. It was working. Not perfectly. Not all at once. But the work had started. Winter loosened its grip slowly that year. By February, the snow had turned to slush, the sky to slate, and the mood in our home unexpectedly lighter. Not because life had suddenly become easy, but because the truth had been spoken out loud, and none of us were trying to pretend anymore. One Saturday morning, Thea was back at the table with her pencils, working in quiet focus. I poured her orange juice, and as I placed the glass down, I noticed the page she was working on. It was another family scene. But this time, the setting wasn't a house. It was a park. A picnic blanket. Trees in the background. Everyone was sitting casually, no table to divide them. Just legs crossed, elbows touching, food passed from hand to hand. Dane was there. So was Clara. Even Adelaide, drawn with softer eyes. And Thea? Right in the middle. Drawing. Not off to the side. Not separate. Not forgotten. "Who's that?" I asked, pointing to a figure I didn't recognize. "Oh," she said, smiling, "that's for someone new." I left a space. "For who?" She shrugged. "Whoever decides they want to show up next." I laughed softly. "An open invitation?" She nodded. That afternoon, Dane came by, just as he said he would. No gifts. No drama. Just a small sketchpad tucked under his arm and a sheepish look on his face. Thea met him at the door and handed him a blank piece of paper. "Draw whatever you want," she told him. "But be honest." He smiled. "I'll try." They sat at the coffee table for over an hour, drawing side by side. I didn't hover. I didn't interrupt. I let it happen. At one point, Dane looked over at me and said, "It's harder than it looks, being honest with crayons." "That's why most people never try," I replied. He nodded. Before he left, he handed Thea his page. She looked at it, smiled, then said, "You can stay in the circle." He looked like she'd just handed him a pardon. She had. March came. Then April. Thea started writing short stories to go with her pictures, little narratives about families that laughed together and sometimes cried but always came back to the circle. She brought them to school. Her teacher sent home a note saying her empathy was exceptional. I smiled at that. Empathy wasn't exceptional. It was just rarely encouraged. But Thea had never known another way. She didn't come out of that night colder or harder. She came out clearer. She didn't need a room full of people who forgot her name. She needed one person who remembered what mattered. That's all any of us need. The final drawing we framed was one she gave me on my birthday. It showed the two of us standing outside our small house, holding hands. Above us were stars. Behind us, not a castle, not a mansion, just a simple tree with lights. And beneath it, one word. Enough. Because it was. It always had been. We just had to see it. And now, we did. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.